entire Chinese population just decided they no longer wanted the CCP in power, like that would be their end, probably.
Or even, well, imagine 1% of the Chinese population. That's a lot of people,
You think that's all it would
right?
take?
That's not what I'm saying. I think if it was 1% of the population, probably the regime would be able to suppress them as long as that 1% wasn't inside the armed forces.
Mm.
But what I'm saying is, when you're governing a country as large as China, right, it is vast. The population is huge. It doesn't take everybody in the country to rise up against a regime. And this is why I think if you look at what Xi Jinping has done over the past 10 years or so, a lot of it has been about tightening the coercive tools of the state, surveillance and control, in order to offset the potential for internal threats and strengthening the security apparatus of the state. I think the CCP is afraid of its own people, probably rightly so. Not that I'm expecting it, a mass uprising against the CCP, not at all, because what the CCP has done is destroyed all other independent forms of social organization. There are no independent trade unions. There are no real other political parties in the country. The party penetrates all aspects of social and economic life, increasingly into even the private sector. So people may be discontented, but they don't have any organizations through which they can act collectively. So if there was unrest, it would be spontaneous. And that's what we have seen. We saw, quite spontaneous protests against the dynamic zero COVID policy, which was totally insane, which did not cause the change in policy, in my judgment, but definitely would have rattled the regime. We've seen, spontaneous labor protests, spontaneous civic protests around the property issue, for example. And also we're seeing these
mortgage strikes, right? Wasn't there?
Yes, mortgage strikes and kind of social mobilizations on the streets of people who had lost money over various housing issues. And there's also this phenomenon which you would have seen, I think, reported about sort of mass attacks, these sort of disaffected individuals who are, the courts ruled against them in some way, and then they commit atrocities, whether they attack people with a knife or they drive their car at people and kill civilians en masse. I mean, these are kind of isolated incidents. It's I don't want to say this is some epidemic, but these are all signs of societal discontent, as is the enormous level of capital flight out of China, right? So rich people continue to try and funnel their money out of China by hook or by crook, which tells you that they don't really see a future for themselves or their children in China. They don't think it's stable anymore. They don't think that their interests are going to be preserved by the regime. So it looks very solid and stable, and I don't want to say it's unstable or it's going to fall or something like that, but there are always cracks in these kinds of regimes.
Is the capital flight, is that definitely, do you think, people's sort of thought that the regime won't last, or is that maybe just a response to the fact that in a lot of countries in the West, money will buy you freedom, basically. It will, in the sense that, in the UK, for example, you can be a despot or an oligarch from somewhere in the global south, and you can come to London and we will help you wash your money and store it, and you can buy citizenship, you can get private security, you can buy yourself for not that much money plenty of influence with MPs, or you can buy gifts for members of the ruling party and get possibly favorable treatment. You can do Google and buy the tech ministers a hospitality package for Glastonbury and then have their digital services tax reduced the next day. There's a lot of benefits to being wealthy in the West. And in China, it doesn't seem to matter how much money you have, that you have to say one wrong word, like Jack Ma, for example, like the richest, I think he was the richest guy in China, and he just disappeared for a while. Is that, do you think it's more sort of the freedom aspect, like the fact that with enough money you can get out of China and put your money somewhere that's a little more free? Or do you think it really is their sort of thoughts that the regime might not last as long?
Yeah, sorry if I implied that they're sort of betting that the regime is going to collapse, then that's, I've not expressed myself properly. It is more, as you say, that their interests are no longer being served, that they don't see a future for themselves. It's not that they don't see a future for the regime necessarily, it's that the regime is no longer serving their interests as well as it once did. There has been, as part of this sort of wider tightening of control, there's been a tightening of control over the private sector, crackdowns on the tech sector, crackdowns on individual IPOs, individual entrepreneurs, as you've mentioned, and the overall sort of market sentiment of these people is now decidedly negative. So they're trying to get their money out because they probably want to get out themselves as much as possible, or the opportunities to make as much money through investment, which was often, laden, closely connected with corruption in the past. Those opportunities are drying up. So it's about their confidence in the regime and their confidence about themselves and their place in society and their capacity to keep acquiring wealth, more than it is a sign of the idea that they think the regime is about to topple or something like that. I don't think they think that. It's not that. However, the scale of capital flight from China, we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars a year, is a serious problem, which will have economic consequences, because that's money that perhaps in the past might have been reinvested in production in China, for example, and therefore or consumption within China, and could therefore have spurred economic growth. So if you've got capital flight, that's not a good thing, and that will have knock-on political consequences. So when capitalists go on strike, right, when they don't invest or when they take their money out of your economy, that's not very welcome for any capitalist state. And China is, of course, a capitalist state.
Yeah.
Do you run a business of any kind? Do you want 25% off up to 20 taxi rides? Well, if you sign up to Bolt Business with my promo code, that's exactly what you'll get. You don't have to use all 20 rides, and you can use it for your own business rides or for your employees. It couldn't be simpler. Follow the link in the description and use the code BB25OFF20 to get 25% off 20 taxi rides today. That's BB25OFF20. Hey everyone, thanks for making it right the way to the end of the podcast. I love that you tuned in this long. Do me a favor, hit subscribe, because 80% of you bastards are not subscribing, but you're watching my videos. See you next time.